Welcome to Welcome to a new series. This might just be a Zealots of Burbio special, or this could be a new series built around how to create an RPG system. So this is a relatively
Special episode.
Today's episode, we're going to almost do an overview, a vague idea of everything that you need, the fundamentals of any RPG system. And if you want to create your own that fits your own game or has certain ideas, like certain stats, whatever you have in mind built into it, then this is the video for you, because this is free enough that you'll be able to do exactly what you want, but it also will explain all that you need for an RPG system to work, and for it to facilitate role-playing and create a lot of different interesting situations for the players that can also move forward a good story and have certain levels of risk. So all of this is actually kind of simple, and we'll be going through this all in 7 steps. Now, number 1, you need a succeed and fail mechanic, some sort of risk factor. And usually this is used, for example, in D&D, this is a dice. Also in the True RPG, it's a dice. In D&D, it's a D20. True RPG, it's a D10, 10-sided dice, 20-sided dice. And then, for example, in Dread, another RPG used usually for horror, that's a Jenga tower, because that creates a level of suspense and risk. So you can use whatever you want just to create some sort of level of risk, so that if they fail, if the Jenga tower falls, if they roll too low on the dice, then they fail what they're trying to do, so that the player characters can't just go forward and complete everything that they want to complete perfectly with no flaws, anything. You have to have some sort of level of failure. And you can have like partial successes. You can have like several tiers in which if they roll within a certain tier, they might get maybe some things right, but some things wrong. There might be some downsides. And then if they roll really high, then they get perfect success. You can do that if you want, but you do need some level of risk so that they can succeed or they can fail in anything they wish to do that has some level of risk. Some things like walking, obviously you don't need to have them roll for that, but you do need a mechanic in place. So there are 3 parts to this mechanic. So the first is the tool. That's the dice, the Jenga tower, perhaps like even cards. A deck of cards could work for that. Those sort of things. Just trying to be creative with that can actually really add things to your game. Using a D20, that's a pretty standard dice to use, and if you do the math of it, every side of the dice is 5%. So you can use that, or you can use a D100 instead to have like some sort of percentile system. But no matter what you're doing, even if you use like a D4, that's just 25% chance per side. So try to balance that out. If you're using multiple dice, like 2d6s, 3d6s, that sort of thing, that will change the mechanics a little bit, because you're more likely to roll some things. Like, for example, with 2d6s, you're more likely to roll a 7. So there are multiple ways that you can almost manipulate certain rolls to being more close to the average, so that extreme rolls are less common, but also more powerful, something like that. But nonetheless, no matter what tool you're using, you need a tool so that there is some sort of game aspect to the role-playing game. Then the second is a goal. What do they need to roll in order to succeed or fail? In D&D, this is called a DC, or a difficulty class. And in some other systems, it could even be something like you need to simply pull out the Jenga block and make it so the tower doesn't fall. That's the goal, pretty much, of the individual roll. And so it's very simple for that. It could be something like flip a coin, you just need heads, right? But no matter what you're doing, you need a certain point at which they succeed rather than failing. Or like I said earlier, you could have certain tiers to that. But you do need those points, and you need to make a system so that those are definite, so that you kind of know a consistent way of getting that number. Or it could be consistently inconsistent, such as you always roll against them for anything. So no matter what you're doing, you do need to set that number and have a certain way of getting that number every time. Now, for the third part, you need the assistance. So this is some sort of bonus that you add, some sort of system to make it so that if they're smart, if they have ingenuity, if they're role-playing really well, and this makes sense, or if they just have a way to maybe be better at it because their characters are better and have background in this, then you have to have a way to make it so that they can really be rewarded for that and don't have to roll perhaps as high, or for some systems, you could make it so that it's maybe you always roll 2d6s for things, but if they have advantage, as it's called in Dungeons & Dragons 5e, you can maybe add another d6 to their roll, and if it's disadvantaged, then you take away a d6 to their roll. But no matter what you're doing, you need to have some sort of leniency so that there's advantage and disadvantage. They kind of have a way for them to be able to add to their roll, especially based on the skills of the character, so that there is a little bit of a difference. So it's not just, it doesn't matter who rolls or who pulls the Django dice. Like, sometimes it works, but it really can be good to reward certain characters for having certain skills or abilities, and that's how stats can kind of come into that. And that brings us to our second point in how to create an RPG. So, this is skill sets. Each character should have a certain skill set, certain abilities, certain almost class feats, as they're called in D&D, where they can have certain bonuses to doing what they want to do, or they have certain things that they can do that other people can't do, like spellcasting, or maybe calling upon a deity, or maybe doing a backflip, something like that. They are either better at it, or they are the only ones that can do it. Part of this is also stats. This is why you see stats very commonly in a lot of RPG systems. Stats can range from a lot of areas. Like, sometimes it's like just strength, agility, intelligence. That's usually like the standard for AD&D. But it could be other things like willpower, or cool, or luck, or wisdom, or some sort of perception skill, or how cautious they are, or perhaps like hit points could even be seen as a stat, and things like speed, things like memory, things like how good they are. Maybe if they're calling upon a deity, they need to have a certain goodness score, and they get goodness points from doing good things. Who knows? There are so many possibilities, and so just choosing your stats based on what you want for your campaign, based on the overarching idea for your RPG system, that can be really, really fun. Some other things could just be like survival, insight, maybe like D&D skills you could make into stats. And also you could, just like the true RPG, you don't have to make it so that the stats are linear. It's just high or low, and you have to roll or do some sort of system to find out where your stats are. You could make it so they can choose their stats, the players, to make it so that their stats fit what they have as an idea for their character. And by choosing their stats, you could make it like, true RPG has a polar system where if you're good at one thing, you're less good at the other, the opposite. But you could try to think of other systems. There are tons of possibilities for this. The more creative you are, the more fun it'll be. But just try to keep it somewhat realistic. Try to keep it so that it makes sense and there's a good rationale behind it. And like I said earlier, these stats should be perhaps added to the rules, perhaps not if that doesn't fit your system, but usually those stats are added to the rules. And you should create a system so that they have to work really hard to be really good at a stat, or have certain sacrifices if they're really good at a stat. And this brings us into the third part, which is character creative freedom. Character creative freedom, indeed. Now, a really easy mistake to do is just to bog down the system with tons of rules. That's not always good. It can be good if you want to make it so that it's a very consistent system in terms of all the rules that you're using. You could make it very specific in terms of like ration rules and doing all these things. And if that's the kind of game you want to play, it'll be more video gamey, more slice of life. But doing that, you should know, will decrease the ability for the players to kind of make their own character, what they want, what they have as an idea. Like, for example, if someone comes into the game hearing about, oh, I can be anything I want, I can make my character, and they want to be like a half dragonborn samurai with shurikens and chakarams or something, you should be able to, maybe if it doesn't fit your world, that's fine, but overall the system should not limit them from being able to do that. D&D, I find that's one of my problems with it. You can probably make that, but there are a lot of boundaries in that. And boundaries are good to some extent, but creating a system that's open will allow for the players to make characters that they want, rather than characters that they're kind of put upon them by maybe class systems or certain systems that pretty much have pre-made characters in terms of all that they can do, and then you just choose small things along that path. It can really be nice to almost have a classless system like the true RPG, where you just kind of do and move through like power trees or whatever way you think of making this, where the players can just choose whatever path they want that fits what their character does best. And of course, that's a lot of work. If you make more power trees, you have to keep them very vast. You have to keep them very versatile, and you have to make it so that they're balanced too, which is very difficult. It takes a lot of work, takes a lot of like playtesting. But then again, what game has been good without playtesting? Very few. But yes, in this, you should pretty much create your RPG in such a way that you find balance between there being rules and stipulations and certain pre-made systems for character creation, but you should also have that other balance of they can create their characters as they want them to be. And it doesn't just have to be a flavor thing, as it usually is in D&D, where they just have to flavor a spell to be for what they want. Instead, they should be able to have the spell that they want and feel that power of actually being able to do something that's completely original and their idea, right? Now, the fourth part is very similar, but this is in-game. This is role-playing facilitation. So you should have a system that allows for role-playing in some fashion. Like I said earlier, if your RPG is like a video game or slice-of-life style RPG, that's fine. You can go that route, but there's also the route of going high drama, which is like pretty much throwing them into certain scenes, taking out a lot of the stuff like sleep. Like most RPGs are going to take out things like going to the washroom or eating, but it's taking out things like sleep, taking out things like individual conversations or going shopping or all those things, because by taking those out, you actually make the game more fun for those moments where it's very dramatic, but also it can get exhausting. Sometimes people want that idea where they just feel like they're in the world, in the game, and they just are existing and doing normal things. So you can choose your RPG style based on that, but just know that. And when you do that, there are lots of mechanics that have to come along with that. If you're going the slice of life route, like I said earlier, rations is a thing, injuries, travel time, pricing, all those sort of things are things you need to keep track of. And those factors are not as common in more of a drama, high drama based RPG, in which there are fewer mechanics overall, and it's more a place for acting, more a place for expression, and it'll be more free in terms of the rules, but also sometimes harder to dungeon master, or harder to run the game, because you have to be creative, and you have to constantly understand how to balance things. Also, in this, in role-playing facilitation, there should be that advantage-disadvantage system, as I talked about earlier, in which you can reward players for being smart. You can reward the players for thinking outside the box about something. And sometimes you don't need an advantage system to do that, but having that in the system, it could just be adding certain bonuses to the roll. It could be, like I said earlier, adding certain dice to the roll. Or it could be something like in D&D, when you just roll 2d20s, and when you roll, you take the higher one if it's advantage, you take the lower one if it's disadvantage. You could do that too. Like, there are a lot of ways you can do it. In Jenga, if there's disadvantage, you might just have to roll more. You might just have to pull more blocks. But if there's advantage, the keeper might just decide to make it so it's like, okay, if you would have to pull multiple, maybe you can just pull one, or maybe you don't have to pull any at all, right? It can be really fun to think about different systems of advantage, disadvantage, so that you can really move forward what the players can do. There are also some other ways you can do it, like you can have luck or inspiration in D&D, or those sort of things, so that they can have certain bonuses to roll, so that they are rewarded in terms of how well they're role-playing, so they can feel like they're really being encouraged to play the game and act, and do things that might not be objectively ideal, but are in character. Now, part 5 is combat. Every system has rules for some sort of fighting scenario. This may be difficult because it includes like stats, attacks, abilities, and also things like weapons, armor, shields, magic. There are lots of factors that go into it, and also creating like monsters and balancing those monsters or NPCs or whatever you're fighting, and also doing things like defense. Like that can be a lot of work to decide how defense works. In D&D, it's just they have to hit higher than a number and then they deal pretty much full damage. In some other RPGs, they just deduct the damage by the defense. Like, there are lots of ways you can do defense, and just overall rules, damage, that sort of thing. And understanding how that works is very important, because you don't want your players to go into combat and then be like, oh crap, we don't know what to do at all. And then you're like, as a game master or whatever, creating this game, you're like, I don't know what to do. I just kind of created the rules like way too basic. So there's a good balance you have to find. But if you do get it bogged down with a lot of rules, like each individual weapon's damage and damage dice and bonuses to certain things, you can do that, but it'll make it way more video gamey for one thing, and it'll make it so that overall combat will be a lot slower. It'll be bogged down in such a way that each person's turn could take a long time, and Dungeons & Dragons is very much like that, and a lot of people do like that. But at the same time, if you want just the dramatic things, if you want just the storytelling aspect of it, sometimes it's good to just limit that to maybe something like This is defense if you're wearing armor. This is straight damage for this type of weapon, like maybe sword, axe, or some sort of hammer weapon. Like you can make it very simple and make it so this is a straight damage, this is what you add, and just simplify it as much as you want. And that way it doesn't get bogged down, but also, yeah, it does simplify it in such a way that there is less skill involved in fighting, or there is less ingenuity required. And sometimes people like that. Another really important part of combat is the hit point system. It makes it so that there's risk to the player character's life, and it also makes it so that the fight can end. You can kill the enemy, right? So making a hit point system, it's kind of hard to make one that's not the classic just hit points. You just take damage, and then it goes down. True RPG is a little different, but it does have the harm system, but it is a little different in the way that there's lots. Willpower is the big thing, so you can just stop fighting because you just lose the will to fight, or you are out of energy, that sort of thing. But yeah, overall, hit point system is something that you definitely need. Some other things, how much movement they can have. Does a player need to move as their turn, or how much can they move? Can they chase? What about chase scenes, right? And then also there's the idea, how much can they do on their turn overall? Like D&D has the bonus action movement system, but there are lots of different ways you can have variants to that in your RPG. Now, the sixth part is balance. Balance is a very important part of any RPG. It makes it so that, well, two things. For one, it makes it so that the player characters don't feel as if they're being dwarfed by another character that's like way more powerful than them, right? It makes it so that they feel like they can all shine in different times. It also makes it so that when you're fighting an enemy, you don't just instantly die to them, or the fights aren't always so easy that there's no risk or there's no intensity. So finding balance both between whatever classes you have, whatever system you have for character creation, finding balance so that all the player characters are equally balanced, at least maybe not all good at like strength or all good at one thing, because they will have different characters, but at least in such a way that they all feel like they can do something in a combat situation, in a social situation, no matter what they're doing, they all feel like they can add something to the gameplay. And lastly, for number 7, we have character sheets. Character sheets are very basic, very important. It's important to understand how character sheets work overall and what needs to be on them. But overall, what a character sheet is, if you don't know, I'm sure you know because you're watching this video, but a character sheet is just a place to put down stuff. Literally, it's that simple. It's just a place that they can reference to be like, oh, I have this many hit points, or I can deal this much damage. In combat, that's how that works. When it's not in combat, maybe inventory, or maybe certain social skills or stats that they can add, or certain abilities. But that's where they put it all. That's where they write it all down so that they know and can refer to that when they need it. So there are just some basic things you need to include. One is a character name. That's really easy to forget, and then it's really annoying because it's like, wait, which character is this? What am I doing? And also that just adds some like personality to the character sheet, where you can look back years past and be like, oh, I remember this character. This character's great. I love that name too. Like, very important. Secondly is stats. You might not have many stats in your RPG system. You might just keep it like 2 stats, or maybe like one polar stat system. Like there are a lot of micro RPGs that are very simple in terms of stats, but a place where you can put down and fill in what your stats are, that's very important. And also stats do include, I would say, hit points, defense, stamina, those sort of stats as well. Next is skills and abilities. These are the things that either you can do that are special to your character, or things that you just excel at, that other people might be able to do, but you're definitely better. So they would rely on you to do that. Having some sort of place for that. It might be like D&D where they have all the skills pre-made, and then you just fill in if you have those skills. Or it might be something like a true RPG where you have to write down what your skills are. Or in Dread, it's simply you just have a background, and you just have certain skills that you would think of that your character would be a little better at. The next part is inventory. This should have this could either be a slot system, or this could just be a list of things that you have, and there should be some sort of system to show like this is how much stuff you can hold or what you can hold, because you can't hold 8 great swords or whatever, right? So there should be some sort of system of inventory and carrying capacity, and that should also be on there if that exists. And then lastly is weapon attacks and all the damage and bonuses that they have. Having 2 or 3 slots for this can be good. Like they can have 1 ranged weapon, 1 dagger, and 1 melee weapon, or something along those lines. And if they're a spellcaster, maybe they just have 3 main spells, and then they can write the rest on the back of their sheet. but overall you should have a place so they can quickly refer to, oh, this is the damage that I deal, or maybe the damage dice that I deal, or that sort of thing. Overall, when creating an RPG, it's really important to understand the basics of you need to facilitate what they want to do in such a way that they can't just do everything they want to do, but also that they can try to do what they feel like they want to do and be better at some things than others. But overall, just create a world, tell a story, and everyone will have fun. Well, the Zelta Burbio, thanks you for your time. And I hope you learned something out of this video, or at least got inspired to maybe make your own system, maybe even just a micro RPG. If you have any more video ideas, please post them in the comments. Farewell.